My son lay unconscious while his wife erased me from our home, our photos, and our future. My son was still strapped to a ventilator when his wife changed the porch light. It had always been the same warm bulb glowing like a small promise every night in Harbor's Edge. But that evening, when I pulled into the driveway with my hands trembling on the wheel, the bulb was gone, replaced by one of those harsh, blue-white LEDs glaring down at me like I didn't belong. Then I tried the key, and the lock didn't turn. That's when my stomach dropped the same way it does when the phone rings in the middle of the night and you already know it isn't good news. I didn't shout. I didn't pound on the door. I just stood there on the porch in the salt air of our little town, holding a grocery bag with Mason's favorite soup mix, and realizing I was a guest at my own front door. And that's when the neighbor's dog barked, not like it usually did, playful tail wagging, but sharp warning, like even it had been told I wasn't welcome anymore. That moment told me everything. If you've ever felt erased in your own family, if you've ever wondered how someone could steal the very place you built your life in, stay with me. Because what happened next isn't just my story. It's the truth I refused to let die. The night before the accident, I had left that same porch light on like I had since Mason was 16 and sneaking back from the marina past curfew. It wasn't a punishment. Then it was my way of saying, I'm awake. I care. Get home safe. Harbor's Edge is the kind of town where boats outnumber cars, and everyone knows which porch belongs to which family. The Whitaker porch light had always meant home, but that night, when the beam hit me like a police spotlight, I understood it no longer meant mine. Mason had been working the renovation job down at the pier, the kind of work that made his shoulders ache, but gave him pride. Then came the collapse, the sirens, the cold fluorescent hallways of St. Luke's ICU. I was still in the same sweater I'd worn to his Little League games 25 years earlier when I first sat by his bed. The machines hissed, the monitors blinked, and his wife Sloane pressed a tissue to her cheek like she was the only one hurting. She held my hand that first night, and I believed her tears. I wanted to, but less than 24 hours later, I was standing on the outside of a locked door. A folded note was taped to the mailbox. 4 words in handwriting that didn't even bother with punctuation motel for now. Inside the envelope, a plastic room key with the name Seabreeze Inn stamped on it in faded blue letters. I knew the place. Everyone in town did. The carpets always smelled faintly of mildew, the curtains never closed right, and the vending machine ate your quarters. That was where she sent me while my son lay unconscious 3 miles away. I drove there anyway. The man at the desk didn't even look up when I slid the key across the counter. He just muttered, "Room 12, left side." The door groaned as I pushed it open, the air conditioner coughing dust into the stale air. I dropped the grocery bag on the bedspread patterned with seashells and anchors the same design they'd had since the 80s, and sat down without taking my coat off. I stared at the plastic lotion bottle on the nightstand. The label said, Ocean Breeze Renewal. Renewal. The cruelest word I could imagine that night. I didn't cry. Not yet. Instead, I made a list in my head. That's something I've always done when I felt the ground shifting under me. Number 1, Mason's soup mix still sealed, still mine to deliver. Number 2, the old porch light bulb, warm and familiar, gone without a word. Number 3, the motel key in my palm, foreign, unwanted, but real. And then came the sound I dreaded most, my phone buzzing against the nightstand. I picked it up expecting the nurse may be bad news, but it wasn't. It was a notification. Withdrawal confirmed, $740,000 emergency disbursement. Mason's name attached, though he hadn't opened his eyes once since the accident. I froze. Some people say betrayal feels like fire, but to me, it felt like ice water pouring down the back of my neck. silent, stunning. And in that moment, sitting coatless on a motel bed that smelled of bleach and salt, I knew something bigger than grief had arrived at my doorstep. The first morning at the Seabreeze Inn felt colder than the night before. The heater had clicked off sometime around dawn, leaving the room damp, the kind of chill that sinks into your bones and makes you feel twice your age. I sat on the edge of the bed with my shoes still on, staring at the soup mix I'd meant to bring to Mason, and wondering if I'd ever be allowed to deliver it. My phone lit up again, but not with a call from the hospital. Another notification. Transfer completed $740,000. Account holder Mason Whitaker. Beneficiary Archer Family Trust. I blinked, certain I was misreading it. Mason had never even mentioned a trust, and he hadn't written a single word since the accident. I whispered to the empty room. He couldn't have signed this. My own voice sounded foreign, too loud for those sagging motel walls. I drove straight to St. Luke's ICU, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tight the veins stood out. At the front desk, I asked for updates, heart pounding. The nurse on duty, a young man with soft eyes, checked the chart. Stable but unresponsive, he said quietly. Private status. Family only. I am his family? I said louder than I meant. My throat felt raw. He hesitated, then shrugged with the kind of bureaucratic helplessness I'd seen too many times in small-town hospitals. You'll have to talk with his wife. She has the access code now. When I walked down the sterile hallway, the smell of disinfectant sharp and cloying, I saw Sloane through the glass. She sat by Mason's bed, immaculate as always, a silk scarf draped over her shoulders. Her hand rested lightly on his arm, more like a performance than a gesture of love. And there on the tray table beside her was my son's phone screen, glowing with messages she scrolled through, deleting one by one. I tapped the glass. She didn't look up. I tapped harder. Finally, she glanced over her shoulder, her expression slipping just for a moment into irritation, before she pasted on a smile and mouthed the words, "Later." Not now. Then she drew the curtain shut. I felt something inside me split. Not just pain, but the sense that I was being erased piece by piece. First, the porch light. Then the lock. Now the curtain. Back at the motel, I tried to swallow the lump in my throat. The room smelled faintly of bleach, but beneath it, mildew like a secret rotting in the walls. I pulled the curtains back, hoping for sea air, but all I saw was the flicker of the neon vacancy sign outside. I couldn't cry. Instead, I made another list, scribbling on the back of the motel receipt with the hotel pen that barely worked. Porch light changed. Lock replaced. Motel key unwanted. Mason's funds gone. Access code denied. Each line felt like a door closing. That evening, I drove back past my house. I don't know what I expected. Maybe a crack in the curtain, a familiar silhouette. What I saw instead stopped me cold. Through the living room window, the photo wall had been rearranged. My husband Robert's picture, the one taken the year before he passed, when he was still fixing boats and smiling with that lopsided grin, was gone. The frame remained, but it held a print of some coastal landscape, generic and soulless, like something you'd buy at a chain store. And in the Thanksgiving photo from 3 years ago, where I'd stood between Mason and Robert, my image had been cropped out. A square of beige paper covered the spot where my face had been. I stumbled back to my car, heart pounding. She hadn't just locked me out, she was erasing me one frame at a time. The next morning, I tried calling Sloane. Straight to voicemail. My second call rang once, then cut off. By the third, the message box was full. When I walked into the ICU again, security met me at the door. A tall man with a badge clipped to his belt, who didn't even know my name, but knew enough to keep me out. "I need to see my son," I insisted. He shook his head. "Only immediate family." wife's orders. I am his immediate family. My voice cracked, echoing off the tiled walls. People stared. The guard didn't flinch. Ma'am, you'll have to leave. So I did. Out into the biting coastal wind, coat collar pulled high. But inside, I was on fire. That night in the motel, I found myself sitting on the floor instead of the bed, back against the wall, staring at the soup mix like it held answers. My mind kept circling back to the notification. $740 gone, signed, approved, processed. I whispered Mason's name like it might conjure him, like he might sit up in that hospital bed and tell me it was a mistake. But he didn't. Instead, the motel TV hummed in the background some rerun of Wheel of Fortune. The contestants clapped and laughed, while my world hollowed out. That was the cruelest part, that life outside kept spinning like nothing had changed. I pressed my palms together, felt the ridges of my skin, the tremor in my hands, and told myself one thing: this isn't the end. Maybe Sloane thought she could cut me out quietly without a sound. But silence isn't the same as consent, and I wasn't finished yet. The third morning at the Seabreeze Inn, I woke before dawn to the hum of the old air conditioner. I hadn't slept, not really. My eyes burned, my hands ached from clenching them into fists against the sheets. At some point in the night, I realized the lists I'd been making weren't just coping mechanisms. They were evidence. Each line I wrote down, Porchlight Lock Trust Fund, was a breadcrumb leading somewhere. And if I didn't follow them, no one would. I drove into town as the sun rose over harbor's edge, painting the harbor in a soft pink glow. Fishermen were already hauling gear, coffee shops opening their doors. Life in small towns has a cruel way of looking the same, even when yours is falling apart. I parked in front of the public library, the same one Mason used to spend summer afternoons in when he was 12, hiding in the history aisle while other kids played Little League. I walked inside, nodded to the gray-haired librarian, and headed straight for the computer terminals. My fingers shook as I typed in my name, then Mason's, then the address of the house I'd paid off with Robert 25 years ago. The printer whirred, spitting out the old deed, Eleanor Whitaker and Mason Whitaker co-owners. My name in bold black ink, proof that I hadn't imagined my place in that home. I slipped the paper into my purse like it was gold. On the way out, I passed a flyer tacked to the bulletin board, free legal advice for seniors, Wednesday Fellowship Hall. It was Monday. I pulled the tab with the number anyway. My hand trembled less as I stuffed it into my pocket. That afternoon, I drove to the church downtown. The parking lot was nearly empty, except for a pickup truck I recognized, Hank Morales, my neighbor across the street, retired harbor patrol. He'd been there the night Mason brought Sloane home for the first time, grilling salmon in his backyard and making jokes too salty for polite company. He spotted me and waved me over. "Ellie," he said, his voice low, serious. "I heard about the accident, and I heard other things." I looked at him wary. In a small town, gossip spreads faster than oil on water. "What did you hear? That you were locked out? That the house is in some kind of trust?" His brow furrowed. "I know the clerk at Coastal Credit Union. If there's a notary record, I can ask a few questions." For the first time in days, I felt the smallest flicker of relief. "Would you?" I asked, my voice cracking. He nodded firm. "For you, of course." That night at the motel, I didn't sit staring at the soup mix. I pulled out a shoebox I'd grabbed from my trunk before leaving the house. Old birthday cards, high school essays, a Father's Day note Mason wrote in sloppy penmanship. His handwriting unpolished, imperfect, but his. I spread them on the bedspread like puzzle pieces. My chest tightened. If she forged his signature, I would prove it. The phone buzzed again, but this time it wasn't another cold notification. It was a voice I didn't expect. "Mrs. Whitaker." The voice was soft, hesitant. "Yes, This is Priya Patel, ICU nurse at St. Luke's. I probably shouldn't be calling, but I thought you should know. When I said Mason's name this morning, his hand twitched. He opened his eyes for a second, and when I asked if he knew who was in the room, he looked at the door. I think he was waiting for you. I pressed the phone to my chest, tears stinging my eyes for the first time since this nightmare began. He remembered me even through the haze. That tiny flicker of recognition was more powerful than all of Sloane's papers and locks. Thank you, I whispered. You don't know what that means. When I hung up, I knew I couldn't stay paralyzed. I dialed the number from the church flyer. A woman's voice answered brisk and calm. Ava Chen, estate and elder law attorney. Who's this? I told her everything. Not the polished version. Not the quiet don't make waves version. I told her about the porch light, the lock, the motel, the trust transfer, the $741. She didn't interrupt, didn't sigh, just scribbled something down. When I finished, my chest was heaving. Do you have copies of the deed? Any samples of your son's handwriting? She asked. Yes, both. Good. Bring them. And Eleanor. Her tone softened. Don't let her convince you you're invisible. Paper remembers. Ink doesn't lie. I hung up and stared at the clutter of cards and notes on the motel bed. For the first time, the room didn't feel like a coffin. It felt like a war room. The next morning, Hank called. You were right, he said. There's a record, notarized last week, supposedly Mason's signature. But Ellie, the clerk, said something felt off. The witness line wasn't even filled properly. I closed my eyes, clutching the receiver. Proof. The first crack in her wall. That evening, as the sun set over the harbor, I sat in my car by the pier. The gulls squabbled overhead, the boats swayed against their ropes. I pulled out the list I'd written on the back of that motel receipt and added one more line handwriting samples. Witness line blank. Nurse says he remembered me. Each word steadied me. Each line was no longer just a wound, it was ammunition. Sloane thought she could cut me out quietly with forged signatures and cold locks. But I had something she didn't, years of proof in Mason's own hand, neighbors who still remembered what family meant, and a son who, even half-conscious, knew where home was. And for the first time, I felt it, not just grief, not just rage, but resolve. A quiet, stubborn fire that whispered, "You are not done yet." The first real pushback came faster than I expected. 2 days after my call with Ava, a courier showed up at the Seabreeze Inn while I was still nursing a cup of weak motel coffee. He handed me a thick envelope stamped with a crimson seal. Inside was a cease and desist letter. The language was sharp rehearsed, meant to intimidate accusations of harassment, defamation, unlawful entry. It ordered me to stay away from Mason, from the house, and from all assets pertaining to the Archer family trust. My hands shook as I read it. They wanted me to believe I had no rights left at all. For a moment, the old reflex crept back in the urge to keep quiet, to avoid making waves, to retreat into silence like I had after Robert died. But then I remembered Ava's words. Paper remembers. Ink doesn't lie. I folded the letter carefully and slipped it into a folder of evidence. Not a weapon against me, proof against her. Still, the pressure mounted. That same afternoon, the motel manager knocked on my door, holding a clipboard. "Ma'am," he said awkwardly, "your room's been paid through tonight, but after that, well, the account covering it has been canceled. You'll need to pay out of pocket or check out." His eyes darted away, like he didn't want to be delivering the blow. I sat on the bed, clutching my purse. My savings were thin pension checks, barely stretching as it was. Sloane was cutting off my oxygen one line at a time. First the lock, then the photos, now the roof over my head. She wasn't just trying to erase me, she wanted to grind me down until I disappeared on my own. I called Ava, voice tight. She's escalating, I said. Ava didn't sound surprised. That means she's scared. Scared people get sloppy. Did the letter mention the medical power of attorney? I rifled through the pages. Yes, she's claiming it gave her authority. There was a pause on the line. Then Ava's tone sharpened. That form expired last year. If she used it to move the house into a trust, it's invalid. That's a crack we can widen. But we'll need more than suspicion. We need hard evidence. That night, I sat in my car across from Coastal Credit Union, the same bank where Robert and I had opened our first joint account decades ago. Through the glass doors, I saw Sloane stride in wearing a cream coat leather folder tucked under her arm. I pulled my phone from my purse and snapped photos, hands trembling but steady enough to capture the timestamp. She emerged 20 minutes later, hair-sleek sunglasses hiding her eyes even though the sun had already set. She walked like she owned the place. I stayed still, engine off, breath shallow. From the shadows, I caught her reflection in the window as she adjusted her scarf, practiced, polished, rehearsed. I texted the photos to Hank, who still had friends inside. She's filing something. Can you check minutes later? His reply came back on it. Cameras should have footage. Stay low. Back at the motel, I spread everything across the bed, the cease and desist letter. The expired medical power of attorney Ava had flagged the photos of Sloane at the bank. Each item felt heavier than paper. They were bricks in a wall, and I was slowly stacking mine against hers. But the cost pressed in. That night, the motel refused to extend my stay without payment. I packed my suitcase in silence and rolled it across the cracked parking lot, the wheels rattling over loose gravel. The coastal wind cut through my coat sharper than I remembered. For a moment, I thought of just giving up driving to my sister's in Vermont, letting Sloane win. But then, I remembered Mason's hand twitching when Nurse Priya said my name. He was waiting, and if I left, I'd be abandoning him when he needed me most. So I found another cheap place even dingier than the first. The wallpaper peeled, and the light in the bathroom flickered like it couldn't decide if it wanted to shine or die. But I set my suitcase down, pulled out the shoebox of Mason's handwriting samples, and laid them on the table. His life in ink. Proof that he existed, that I existed, that we weren't shadows to be brushed aside. The next morning, Ava met me at her office, a small, second-floor suite above a laundromat. The place smelled faintly of detergent, clean but tired. She spread my papers across her desk, her eyes scanning quickly, efficiently. Here, she said, tapping the outdated power of attorney. This is key. She used this as her weapon, but it expired. That means her actions aren't just morally wrong, they're legally vulnerable. And the photos of her at the bank, that gives us a trail. Her eyes lifted to mine. Ellie, she's building a fortress. But fortresses can collapse if the foundation is rotten. We're going to pry it open. Her certainty steadied me. For the first time, I didn't feel like a victim in someone else's script. I felt like a fighter learning the shape of the battlefield. That evening, Hank called again. His voice carried the rush of someone with news too heavy to sit on. Ellie, I checked. There's surveillance. They've got her on camera with the notary stamp in hand. No Mason, just her. If you can get Ava a subpoena, that footage could break this wide open. I closed my eyes, gripping the phone. Relief and fury tangled in my chest. Sloane had planned everything cleaner, faster, colder than I ever imagined. But she had slipped, and now I had the thread. I hung up, sat back in the motel's rickety chair, and wrote a new list. Not of losses this time, but of leverage. Expired power of attorney. Cease and desist overreach. Photos at Coastal Credit Union. Witness line left blank. Surveillance footage pending. Each word was a step. Each item a crack in her armor. She thought she was winning by cutting me off. She didn't realize that every attempt to erase me was just another piece of proof in my hands. And for the first time, I smiled in the silence of that flickering motel room. Not because it was over, but because I knew the higher she built her walls, the harder it would be when they came crashing down. The day of the hearing arrived with the kind of gray, heavy sky that makes even the ocean look tired. I drove into town in silence, my evidence folder buckled into the passenger seat like a fragile child. Inside it, the deed with my name still printed bold Mason's birthday cards with his looping signature, the cease and desist letter, the expired power of attorney, and the photos of Sloan striding into the bank. Ava met me on the courthouse steps. She looked small against the limestone columns, but there was nothing small about the way she carried herself. Her hair was pulled back, her blazer worn but pressed. She tucked her legal pad under her arm and said, "You ready?" "I've been ready since the lock changed," I answered. Inside the hallway smelled faintly of old paper and floor wax. We walked past portraits of judges long dead, their eyes watching from the frames like they were measuring us. My knees felt unsteady, but Ava's voice kept me anchored. Today isn't about drama. It's about proof. Let the facts do the work. When the clerk called our case, we stepped into a small hearing room, no jury, just a judge at a wooden bench, a stenographer tapping quietly, and on the other side of the room, Sloan with her attorney. She wore a beige coat and oversized sunglasses even indoors, as if hiding her eyes could hide the truth. The judge began. "Ms. Chen, you may proceed." Ava rose smoothly. "Your Honor, we're here to request a temporary freeze on the Archer Family Trust and related disbursements. We believe the trust was created and funded using expired legal authority, fraudulent signatures, and misappropriated assets." The judge lifted a brow. "That's a serious claim. Do you have evidence?" Ava's voice didn't waver. "Yes, Your Honor. Several pieces, but I'd like to start with this." She tapped the folder and pulled out a photocopy. "This is the medical power of attorney that Mrs. Archer claims gave her authority to act on Mr. Whitaker's behalf. Note the expiration date, March of last year. The trust documents were executed in June. This document was not valid at the time of signing." The judge leaned closer. "Expired." "Yes, Your Honor." Ava laid the paper flat for the record. Across the table, Sloan's attorney shifted, clearing his throat. Clerical oversight. The intent was clear. Mr. Whitaker's wife had full access. "Intent," Ava said sharply, "does not override expiration. Law does." The judge's pen scratched across his notes. My chest tightened, breath shallow. For the first time, the cracks were showing in Sloan's wall. Then Ava reached for the next page. "Furthermore, we have surveillance footage from Coastal Credit Union on the day the trust was notarized. May I present Exhibit B?" The clerk wheeled in a small screen. A grainy video began to play. There she was, Sloan entering the bank with her leather folder, pausing to adjust her scarf. The timestamp glowed 10:42 a.m. The notary's desk visible, papers spread, Sloan sliding them forward, the notary stamping. What was missing was louder than anything on screen. Mason. He was nowhere. The room went still. The air conditioner hummed, the only sound. "Your Honor," Ava said quietly, "my client's son was under general anesthesia at St. Luke's ICU during this time. He could not have been physically present, nor could he have signed any document." The judge looked up, eyes narrowing. "Is that confirmed?" "Yes," Ava answered. "We have his medical records, stable but unconscious." Sloan's attorney stammered, "This proves nothing. He could have signed before." Ava didn't let him finish. "Then perhaps we should compare signatures." She lifted one of Mason's birthday cards, scanned it, and placed it beside the trust document. The difference was obvious even to me. Mason's real signature leaned forward, letters running together with the impatience of a man who wrote like he talked, quick and unpolished. The forged one was stiff, deliberate, each loop too careful, as if traced. The judge studied them, lips pressed tight. "And your handwriting expert?" A woman stepped forward from the gallery, someone Ava had arranged without telling me. She laid out charts, overlays, magnified comparisons. Her voice was calm, but firm. This signature was simulated. It is not genuine. The pen pressure is inconsistent, the strokes halting. Classic signs of forgery. My stomach flipped. After weeks of silence, of being told I was nothing, here was someone saying out loud what I had known in my bones. Then the door at the back creaked open. A wheelchair rolled in. My breath caught. It was Mason. Thin, pale, IV line trailing behind him, but awake. His nurse pushed him forward, then stepped back. His eyes found mine across the room. For a moment, I forgot where we were. I forgot about judges and lawyers and trust funds. It was just my boy looking at me the way he had when he was 8 years old and scraped his knee eyes searching for reassurance. The judge frowned. "Who authorized this?" "I did," Ava said. "Your Honor, with your permission, Mr. Whitaker would like to make a brief statement." The judge hesitated, then nodded. "Very well." The nurse wheeled him closer. Mason's voice was faint but steady enough. "That's not my signature," he said, nodding at the forged document. "I didn't sign it. I couldn't. I was in surgery. And I never gave permission to cut my mother out." The words landed heavier than any evidence. For a moment, no one breathed. Even the stenographer's keys slowed, like she knew this wasn't just testimony. It was truth reclaiming its place. Sloane shifted in her chair, sunglasses still on, but her lips pressed thin. Her hands gripped the armrests so tightly her knuckles whitened. The judge's gaze hardened. "Mrs. Archer, do you have a rebuttal?" Her attorney sputtered, but no words came. The judge rapped his gavel once. "I am granting a temporary injunction. Effective immediately, all transactions related to the Archer Family Trust are frozen. We will investigate the alleged forgery and misappropriation." A hum of whispers spread through the gallery. My knees nearly gave out, but I steadied myself on the back of the chair. Ava squeezed my hand under the table, quick and discreet. It wasn't victory yet, but it was the first time the tide had turned. Afterward, in the hallway, reporters gathered like gulls on the pier. Flashbulbs popped, microphones shoved forward. I wasn't used to being the center of anything, let alone this. One voice shouted, "Mrs. Whitaker, how does it feel to have your son confirm your story?" I didn't answer with sound. I just smiled, small, quiet, but real. That evening, I sat at the harbor's edge. The wind tugged at my hair, the boats rocked gently, and for the first time in weeks, I felt the smallest sense of justice breathing at my side. I pulled out my notebook and wrote one line. "The fortress cracked today." And I knew, with a clarity sharper than the salt air in my lungs, that this wasn't just about money or property or papers. It was about being seen, about refusing to be erased. And with Mason's words echoing in that courtroom, I wasn't invisible anymore. The courthouse emptied slowly that afternoon, but the echo of Mason's words lingered in my chest long after the gavel struck. That's not my signature. It wasn't just evidence. It was vindication. Back at Ava's office, she spread the judge's order across the desk, smoothing the creases with deliberate care. "The Archer Family Trust is frozen. The insurance payout is under investigation. And Ellie, your name is back in play. For now, you're protected." Protected. I'd forgotten what that word even felt like. But the storm wasn't finished. 2 days later, a courier arrived again, this time with a proposal from Sloane's attorney. A neat stack of papers clipped and bound. Settlement offer. Half the assets returned revocation of the trust, but only if I signed a non-disclosure agreement. No public statements, no testimony, no more courtroom battles. I read it 3 times, the words blurring. Half the assets. After everything she had stolen, after cutting my face out of photos and locking me out of my own house, she wanted me to accept silence in exchange for scraps. I slid the papers back across Ava's desk. No. Ava raised her brows. Are you sure it would be easier? Easier for her, I said. My voice didn't shake. Not for me. That evening, I sat in the rehab center with Mason. He was stronger now, his voice rough but steady, his eyes clearer. He fiddled with the edge of his blanket, avoiding my gaze. Mom, he said finally, I filed the divorce papers. With Ava's help. No negotiation, no settlement. He looked up at me then, and I saw the boy I'd raised, the one who used to insist on telling the truth, even when it cost him. I should have known what she was doing. I should have fought harder. I reached for his hand. You were fighting for your life. That was enough. Now we fight for the rest together. The next morning, Ava filed a motion to void the trust completely, citing the expired power of attorney, the surveillance footage, and the handwriting expert's testimony. The judge approved it, stamping the word void across the fraudulent trust deed. The sound of that stamp hitting paper was louder than any gavel. And Sloan. She didn't show up to the hearing. She sent her attorney pale and sweating to deliver a weak objection. It was over before it began. The house was restored to my name and Mason's co-owners once again. The insurance company froze the $741 in limbo pending investigation. But the whispers in the courtroom were clear: restitution would come and fraud charges were possible. That night, I walked through the front door of the house on Harbor's Edge for the first time since the lock had been changed. My new key slid in smooth. The porch light glowed warm again. I'd switched the bulb back to soft amber. Inside, the air smelled faintly of lemon cleaner, too perfect, like it was trying to mask the truth. I didn't touch the furniture Sloan had rearranged. I didn't move the generic coastal prints she'd hung. I went straight to the closet and pulled out the box of holiday cards and old bills. My life, my son's life in ink and paper. Still here, still mine. But the victory wasn't just about reclaiming walls and deeds. It was about setting boundaries that should have been drawn long ago. With Ava's help, I created a living trust, clear, airtight mine. Mason would inherit when I was gone, but not before. No spouse, no paperwork, no clever signatures could ever erase me again. When I told Mason, his eyes softened. I understand. I know you do, I said, because this isn't just about money. It's about respect. The town noticed too. In Harbor's Edge, everyone talks, but now the whispers carried a different tone. Not pity, not scandal, recognition. I wasn't the widow who lost her place anymore. I was the woman who stood her ground and didn't disappear. Still, there was a cost. Sloan vanished from town overnight, leaving her real estate office, shuttered her car, sold. Rumor said she'd gone south, maybe to Florida, maybe farther. Her friends avoided me at the market, embarrassed, unwilling to admit they'd believed her smile. That was their consequence. Mine was different. My life had changed shape. I was no longer just Mason's mother, or Robert's widow, or the quiet neighbor who left her porch light on. I was Eleanor Whitaker, co-owner, again, survivor again. And yet, when I stood in the kitchen that first Sunday morning, back sunlight streaming across the tile, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt steady. The kettle whistled, the coffee grounds bloomed, and for the first time in months, I poured a cup without checking my phone every 2 minutes. No dread, no sudden alerts of vanished funds. Just quiet. Mason visited that afternoon. He was still limping, still thinner than I remembered, but he carried himself differently now. He set his duffel bag on the porch and said, "Not moving back in. Just visiting. I need to build my life on my own terms this time." I nodded. "That's all I want. For you to build it right." We sat on the porch drinking coffee while gulls wheeled overhead. The amber light glowed above us, not as a beacon for him to sneak back to, not as a symbol of me waiting alone, but as a shared light. A sign that after everything betrayal erasure courtrooms forged signatures we had found our way back to truth. The storm didn't end with a bang. It faded like the tide pulling back after weeks of pounding waves. One morning, I woke up in my own bed, sunlight spilling across the quilt Robert and I had picked out decades ago, and realized I wasn't waiting for the next blow anymore. The house was quiet. Not the suffocating quiet of being locked out, not the sterile hush of hospital hallways, but the gentle quiet of belonging. My footsteps sounded like mine again. The porch creaked the way it always had, familiar and forgiving. I brewed coffee, watered the pots of daisies I'd planted by the front steps, and for the first time in months, the day felt ordinary. Ordinary and precious. Mason visited more often now. He never stayed long, just enough to fix the railing or mow the lawn or share Sunday dinner. We didn't fill the silence with apologies. We didn't need to. The way he reached for the salt shaker and handed it to me without asking, the way his eyes lingered on the amber glow of the porch light when he left. Those were the new language between us. Quiet, steady, real. One evening after dinner, I pulled out the envelope from the insurance company. The restitution process had begun. Inside was the first cashier's check, clean and crisp. I slid it across the table toward Mason. He frowned. "Mom, that's yours." "I don't want it." I shook my head. "It's not about want. It's about acknowledgement. She tried to erase us, but this proves we're still here." I tapped the envelope. "Paper remembers. Ink doesn't lie." He smiled faintly, the kind of smile that carried years of weight behind it. Then he folded the envelope back into my hands. "You keep it, invest it in something you love. Not just survival. Life." Later that week, I went back to the community center kitchen, a place I hadn't stepped into since Robert's funeral. The stainless steel counters gleamed, the big pots clanged, and the smell of roasted garlic filled the air. Miriam, an old friend, handed me an apron and said, "We've missed your casseroles." We laughed, and it felt good, real good. They're surrounded by clattering pans and the chatter of volunteers. I remembered something I'd almost forgotten. I wasn't just someone's mother, someone's widow, someone's victim. I was me, and I still had something to give. At night, I sat on the porch with a notebook, not the old motel receipts filled with loss, but fresh pages. This time, I didn't list what was stolen. I listed what endured, my son's eyes finding mine in the courtroom, the amber glow of the porch light, the steady hand of a neighbor who still believed in me. The truth louder than lies. The list was short, but it was enough. Sometimes I still think of Sloan. Not with rage anymore. Rage burns too hot to carry forever. I think of her the way you think of a storm that passed, destructive, unforgettable, but gone. She may have taken months from my life, tried to steal my dignity, my place, my family. But she failed. Because you can't truly erase someone who refuses to stay silent. One evening, Mason lingered on the porch after dinner. The gulls wheeled overhead, the air sharp with salt. He glanced at the porch light and then at me. "You still leave it on," he said softly. I nodded. "Always." He hesitated. "Is it still for me?" I smiled. "It's for both of us now." A reminder that home isn't about walls or deeds. It's about truth. And truth always finds its way back. He didn't say anything else, just squeezed my hand and walked down the steps, the glow of the light following him into the night. And me? I stayed on the porch a little longer, the notebook open in my lap, the words fresh and certain. Dignity isn't loud. It's steady like a porch light you leave on for yourself. If you've ever been pushed aside, if you've ever been told you don't belong in the very life you built, hear me now, you are not invisible. Your voice, your truth, your light, they matter. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise. Because storms pass, walls fall, and what's left if you hold on is you. Whole, seen, enough. At its heart, this story isn't only about a forged signature, a stolen house, or a courtroom battle. It's about something far more universal: the quiet courage it takes to stand your ground when others try to erase you. For many of us, especially as we grow older, there's a fear that our place in the family or in the world will shrink until it disappears. What Ellie's journey reminds us is that dignity doesn't come from titles or bank accounts or even the approval of others. It comes from refusing to let silence define us. She didn't scream or lash out. She gathered proof, she leaned on allies, and she insisted that the truth would speak louder than the lies. And in doing so, she reclaimed not only her home, but her sense of self. For anyone who has ever been told you don't matter, this story is a reminder that you do. Your voice matters. Your presence matters. And even when others try to push you aside, there is always a way to write yourself back in. Hold on to your paper trail, your memories, your stories, because those are the proof of a life well lived. If this story touched you, I invite you to share it with someone who might need to hear these words today. And if you'd like to hear more stories of resilience and quiet strength, consider joining us by subscribing. May your own porch, like the one that belongs only to you, always shine steady and warm.